This is Joseph Phillips. In this presentation, we're going to talk about stakeholder identification. Stakeholders are anyone affected by your solution. So a stakeholder are the individuals, the groups, the organization, the businesses, even people outside of your company that are affected by the solution you create. The size of the scope determines who the stakeholders are. Now, you'll probably work first with your immediate stakeholders. That means your management team, your software developers, the people that will actually be doing the work on the project and the work in the business analyst activities. Now, stakeholder identification is a process that you do throughout the analysis, but also throughout the project. Coordination with the project manager is needed because stakeholder identification is one of their first activities in project initiation. Stakeholders have three levels of activities. They have responsibility, they have authority over the contents of the scope, but they are also expected to participate in the requirements identification. Now, based on the stage you are of the analysis, the stakeholder roles and even their interests can evolve or decline. Now, the attitudes and the authority of the stakeholders directly affect your requirements, so it's important to define the levels of authority for stakeholders. One way you can do this is through a power, influence, impact grid, where you plot out how much influence and how much impact the stakeholder has on your requirements. And this gives you some idea of which stakeholders do you want to keep informed and which stakeholders have the highest influence or authority and impact over your requirements. And those are the ones that frankly, you pay the most attention to. Another approach is organization modeling. And this is just a flow chart or an org chart of how your department or your company or your stakeholders map as far as influence over your business analysts and requirement gatherings and so on. A RACI chart, remember, maps out responsibilities and roles. So it's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. You can also create a stakeholder matrix, which is just a table of your stakeholders by organization. Or you could create an onion diagram, and that's what we're looking at this slide, where the closer you are, the smaller the circle you are, you have influence on all of the other circles. So information services in this example affects management, internal users, and customers. Management in this example affects the internal users and the customers. And then internal users, they only affect customers. So it's just a way of seeing your most important or your key stakeholders and their influence over the requirements. Now, stakeholder identification uses several tools and techniques. The first is just to identify the acceptance and evaluation criteria. So by identifying who's responsible for signing off on your requirements helps you identify stakeholders. Brainstorming and interviews, process modeling where you're mapping out like a flow chart of how you get from one point to another through a process. A requirements workshop, this is a quick, intense workshop with your key stakeholders. Risk analysis, user stories where you basically write how the users will interact with the software solution you're creating. And then surveys. You can do surveys through the web or through even paper, but it's a real fast way to basically interview many people at once. So these are just some approaches that you could use to help identify your stakeholders. Now, stakeholder documentation, this is a very important point, that you want to identify the name and the title of the stakeholders, their contact information. You could do categorization, like what department or group do they belong to, where are they physically located, and then it's important to identify their needs and requirements for the solution. And then lastly, the authority and the influence of the stakeholders should be identified because this helps you prioritize your requirements based on who has asked for what in the solution.